One of a spark, named Ruth, opens with a quiet honesty that feels instantly familiar to many queer women who have loved deeply and long enough to arrive at stability, only to discover that comfort can sometimes feel like confinement, as Lucy's voiceover articulates a fear rarely spoken aloud. Not that life has gone wrong, but that it has gone numb, flattened into routines that are nice and fine yet quietly suffocating. This framing immediately grounds the film in an emotionally grounded lesbian experience, one that resists sensationalism and instead centers the interior lives of women who have built a life together in a world that once told them such a life was impossible, only to now wonder what comes after survival. Lucy and Elizabeth's marriage is not broken, abusive, or cold. It is warm, functional, and loving, which is precisely why Lucy's unease is so unsettling. Because it challenges the idea that long-term queer relationships must either be tragic or triumphant, allowing space for something more complicated and human. Lucy's dreamlike monologue about losing the spark reflects a broader cultural anxiety, especially for queer women who often feel pressure to be grateful simply for having a stable relationship at all, as though wanting more depth, novelty, or passion is indulgent or disloyal. The arrival of Ruth into their home becomes symbolically charged not because she is positioned as a temptation or threat, but because she represents a living reminder of who Lucy and Elizabeth once were, or perhaps who they might still be, a spark embodied, rather than acted upon. Ruth's presence is described not through overt sexuality but through energy and glow, a vitality that mirrors Lucy's memory of Elizabeth when they first fell in love, underscoring how desire in queer narratives is often tied to recognition, reflection, and emotional resonance rather than conquest. Elizabeth's response to Lucy's worry about Ruth staying with them is crucial, as her reassurance is calm and genuine, reinforcing that this marriage is built on trust rather than jealousy, and that queer partnerships can hold complexity without immediately fracturing. Yet Elizabeth is not oblivious. She sees that something is wrong with Lucy, and instead of dismissing it or internalizing it as rejection, she meets it with curiosity and care, suggesting a vacation not as a distraction, but as an invitation to remember themselves beyond their routines. Her recollection of the club and the redhead who danced for Lucy is playful and intimate, not nostalgic in a bitter way, but affectionate, showing how shared memory can be an erotic language of its own, especially for women whose desire has often been erased or trivialized by society. This moment challenges the persistent discomfort around seeing women, particularly married queer women, express desire openly and joyfully, as it refuses the idea that passion must fade with age or commitment, or that women's sexuality exists only for spectacle rather than mutual delight. Lucy's warm smile in response signals that the spark she fears losing is not gone, merely dormant, waiting for permission to resurface. And Elizabeth's offer to be her private dancer is less about roleplay than about reclaiming playfulness itself, an essential yet often neglected component of long-term intimacy. For lesbian audiences, this scene resonates as an affirmation that wanting more does not mean wanting out, and that questioning the shape of one's happiness is not betrayal but honesty, especially in a culture that still scrutinizes queer relationships as either experimental or unstable. For women more broadly, Lucy's internal conflict reflects the pressure to accept emotional stasis as maturity, to equate predictability with success, and to silence longing once the socially approved milestones have been achieved. The film's refusal to frame Ruth as an immediate catalyst for infidelity is also significant, as it sidesteps a familiar trope that often punishes queer women for desire, instead positioning Ruth as a mirror and a memory, a spark that illuminates rather than consumes. Society's discomfort with scenes like this persists because they insist on depicting women as active, agents of desire within committed relationships, challenging narratives that either desexualize married women or sensationalize queer longing as inherently transgressive. By centering emotional safety, mutual consent, and tenderness, the scene makes a case for visibility that is neither sanitized nor exploitative, but truthful. Each woman plays a symbolic role. Lucy embodies the fear of emotional stagnation and the courage to name it. Elizabeth represents love that adapts rather than retreats. And Ruth stands as a reminder of possibility, youth, and the enduring capacity to feel alive. Together, they reflect the real-world pressures queer women face to minimize their needs, justify their desires, and remain grateful rather than curious. And in doing so, the film gently but firmly asserts that authenticity is not about rejecting what you have built, but about daring to ask whether it still fits. Scene 1 of A Spark Named Ruth does not promise answers, but it offers something more valuable: recognition, inviting viewers to see their own questions reflected on screen and reminding them that wanting to feel alive, even in a good life, is not a flaw, but a deeply human truth. Scene 2 of A Spark Named Ruth deepens the emotional terrain established earlier by allowing Lucy to articulate, out loud and without self-deception, the ache that has been quietly shaping her interior life. And in doing so, the film offers a moment that feels profoundly resonant for queer women who have learned, often through necessity, to police their own desires in the name of stability, gratitude, or moral responsibility. Lucy's confession to Elizabeth is not framed as a complaint about her marriage or a rejection of the life they have built together, but as an honest reckoning with comparison and longing, sparked by witnessing Ruth's youth, momentum, and openness to possibility, all of which remind Lucy of a version of herself that feels both distant and painfully close. The way Lucy describes Ruth is telling. She does not fixate on appearance or novelty, but on energy, risk, and forward motion, on the sense that Ruth's life is still expanding rather than settling, which speaks to a broader fear many women experience when they reach a stage where choices feel narrower and paths feel chosen for good. For lesbian audiences in particular, this moment carries extra weight because queer women are often told, implicitly or explicitly, that they should be satisfied simply to have a loving, legally recognized partnership, as though desire must freeze once legitimacy is achieved. And Lucy's discomfort challenges that narrative by suggesting that longing does not disappear just because life is successful. Elizabeth's response is one of the most quietly radical elements of the scene, because instead of reacting with jealousy, alarm, or defensiveness, she smiles and suggests that maybe Ruth is here for a reason, a line that could easily be misread as flippant but instead lands as an invitation to curiosity rather than control. Elizabeth's mischievous warmth reframes Lucy's attraction, not as a betrayal in waiting, but as information, something worth listening to rather than burying. And this dynamic models a kind of emotional safety that many queer viewers may yearn for but rarely see depicted with such restraint. At the same time, Lucy's internal conflict remains firmly grounded in ethics and self-awareness, as she names the discomfort of being attracted to her own mentee, recognizing the power imbalance and the social lines that should not be crossed, which keeps the scene anchored in realism rather than fantasy. This tension between desire and responsibility is central to the scene's power, because it reflects how queer women are often forced to interrogate their feelings more rigorously than their straight counterparts, knowing that any misstep may be judged more harshly or used to reinforce harmful stereotypes. Lucy's attraction to Ruth is framed not as predatory or impulsive, but as an unsettling recognition of something she has lost touch with in herself, and Ruth becomes less an object of desire than a symbol of possibility, a spark that exposes where Lucy feels dormant. Elizabeth, in turn, occupies a complex symbolic role. She is both the partner who represents safety, history, and shared endurance, and the woman who once embodied the same spark Lucy now sees in Ruth, reminding viewers that long-term love is not the absence of excitement, but its evolution. The scene challenges society's ongoing discomfort with women, especially queer women, expressing desire by refusing to punish Lucy for her honesty, or portray Elizabeth as naive or threatened, instead allowing both women to sit with ambiguity, a state that mainstream narratives often avoid, because it cannot be easily moralized. This discomfort persists in part because women's desire, when untethered from male validation or clear narrative outcomes, is still seen as destabilizing, particularly when it exists within marriages that are supposed to symbolize emotional completion. By centering conversation rather than action, the film insists that attraction itself is not the enemy. Secrecy and shame are, and this distinction is crucial for LGBTQ+ audiences who have often been taught to distrust their own feelings. On a broader level, women viewers may recognize Lucy's struggle as a reflection of how society equates maturity with emotional containment, urging women to suppress curiosity and longing in favor of being content, even when that contentment feels hollow. The scene's quiet intimacy, rooted in dialogue and mutual gaze rather than physical escalation, reinforces that emotional honesty is itself a form of connection, and that becoming visible does not always mean being seen by the world, but by the person who knows you best. In allowing Lucy to name her attraction without immediately acting on it, and Elizabeth to respond without fear, the film offers a rare portrayal of queer love as spacious rather than fragile, capable of holding contradiction without collapse. Scene 2 ultimately positions Ruth, not as a disruption to be eliminated, but as a question that cannot be ignored, asking Lucy, Elizabeth, and the audience what it means to keep choosing oneself and one's partner over time, and whether desire, when acknowledged rather than denied, might lead not to destruction but to deeper truth.